There are few cases of the supernatural that receive international attention. Whether it's the haunted house down the street that you feared as a child or the abandoned asylum a few towns over that people were dared to sneak into at night, many ghost stories tend to stay localized. But occasionally a case is so dramatic and intriguing that it becomes widely known around the world. Today we look into one of these cases and I decide if I believe there is any truth to what these children claim to have experienced.
Row, 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 the pump check is down the street. Merrily, 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 lobby got the train.
The Hodgson family lived at 284 Green Street in Enfield, London. For nearly 2 years in the late 70s, the family would experience countless instances of poltergeist activity. Furniture would move, they would hear knocking sounds, disembodied voices, and the children would even levitate and allegedly get thrown around the house by an unseen force. All of the children and their mother Peggy would share many of these experiences that were witnessed by around 30 people in total, but 11-year-old Janet would become the focus of the investigations. While the family claims to have experienced strange noises and other minor activity for a time, things would really kick off on the night of August 30th, 1977. Janet and her brother Johnny were in bed in their shared room. The bed began to shake, terrifying the children, but it would quickly stop when they cried out for their mother. The following night, Peggy heard noise coming from their room when they should be in bed. She walked upstairs to tell them to quiet down, but Janet told her mother that the noise was coming from the chest of drawers against the wall just inside the door. She brushed this off and again told the children to quiet down. But just then the chest of drawers began to shake and move off the wall. She pushed it back to where it was, but it moved out again. She attempted to force it back for a third time, but it would not budge, like something was pushing back against her efforts. They fled the house and went to the Nottinghams next door. Vic Nottingham was an experienced roofer and thought there could be some structural or otherwise physical explanation to explain what Peggy and the children had just seen. So he went back to the Hodgson's house alone to investigate, claiming to hear a knocking sound that followed him throughout the residence. Mrs. Nottingham decided to call the police, fearing that someone might be in her neighbor's home. They arrived around 1 a.m. and began to search. They found nothing out of the ordinary and no one inside. They were preparing to leave when Constable Carolyn Heap saw a chair begin to wobble before sliding about 6 feet across the floor of the kitchen. Things were calm for a few nights, but Mrs. Nottingham again took things into her own hands by calling the Daily Mirror to report what happened. They sent reporter Douglas Benson and photographer Graham Morris. While the media members looked around the Hodgson's home, the family waited next door. Benson Morris ultimately found and experienced nothing unusual. Around 2:30, they prepared to leave but intended to accompany Peggy upstairs as she put the children to bed. They claimed that as soon as they re-entered the home, Legos and marbles began flying around. Graham says he was hit by a Lego brick that came directly across the room at him. Senior reporter George Fallows decided to investigate for himself, bringing Maurice Gross from the Society for Psychical Research with him, who would become one of the more important figures in the investigation. Gross later said, "I found the chaos. The whole family was congregated in the house together with the neighbors next door, and there was a lot of very frightened people there." 3 days later, he was again visiting when they all heard a loud crash from upstairs. They rushed up to find the children fast asleep with a chair that was once next to the bed now overturned and across the room. The story soon became front-page news when the Daily Mirror publishes their story called The House of Strange Happenings. On the 25th, the family was again chased out of their home, this time going to Peggy's brother's house nearby. His wife was making a cup of tea when a piece from a toy appeared out of nowhere in front of her face before dropping onto the counter. This would be the first occasion of poltergeist activity allegedly following the family to another location. About 1 month later, Rosalind Morris from the BBC was making her second visit when she became the first to claim to record actual evidence of activity in the home. In a span of just 15 minutes, she captured about 30 knocking sounds. The family took a vacation to give them a break from the entity. Maurice Gross continued to investigate. He began trying to communicate with the knocks they so often heard. 1 knock for no, 2 knocks for yes. At one point, he claims he was answered with 3 knocks. He asked, "Are you having a game with me?" In return, a cardboard box came flying across the room, hitting him in the face. It was suggested to Peggy that she should leave pens and paper around the house to attempt communication. In the early hours of November 12th at 5 a.m., Janet fell out of her bed, her mattress landing on top of her. Peggy rushed in and defiantly yelled out, "Leave me a message." Minutes later, she found a note on the fridge saying, "I will stay in this house. Do not read this to anyone or I will retaliate." After suffering from a violent seizure, Janet was given Valium by doctors. Later that night, Peggy's brother John went into the girls' bedroom to check on them, but he found something strange. Janet was fast asleep, but she was laying on top of a wide clock radio that was sitting on the chest of drawers that had previously moved, legs in the air, her head hanging down. Luis Gasparetto became the first medium to visit the family. He went into a trance-like state with his eyes closed and produced drawings and paintings. This would later become a focal point for skeptics because Janet witnessed this. We will revisit this later. Just after 1 a.m., Janet was pulled from her bed, thrown out of the room, and found sliding down the stairs, somehow still sound asleep. 2 more Society for Psychical Research members visited along with Maurice Gross. They challenged the entity to speak as they ran an audio recorder. First, they only heard whistles, followed by what sounded like a dog barking. Soon, they allegedly heard a deep masculine voice emanating from Janet. The voice identified itself as Joe Watson. The next night, they repeated the experiment, but this time the voice identified itself as Bill Wilkins. The crew asked Bill how he passed away, and it responded by saying it was a hemorrhage.
Now, if you squeak the bed, I can't hear you talking. Now, say Dr. Belloff. Come on. Come on, say it for me, Dr. Belloff.
Dr. Belloff. Right, that's good. I know. Shut up your door. I'm 72 years old. I come from Jewel Park graveyard. And I have right near the church where Rita lives. And all my friends come from there as well. And we all make a game and go to the pub. And then we pick your house. Because I used to live here. And I will tell you some more. And if you don't tell anyone else, just set Mr. Hook and Mr. Playback.
Just before you died and just after you died?
2 years before I died, I went blind. Then I had an hemorrhage and I fell asleep and I died in a chair in the corner downstairs.
Why can't Janet feel you?
I'm invisible.
You're invisible? Why are you invisible?
So much H-O-S-T.
December 15th would arguably become the most important night for the legend of the Enfield Poltergeist. An investigator was sitting outside the girl's room after having set up a timed camera inside to capture anything that may occur. Pillows and books began to move around. The entity again spoke through Janet and said the investigator was not allowed in the room. The famous image of Janet allegedly levitating between their beds that would become the most iconic evidence in the case was then captured. Magician and paranormal researcher Milburn Christopher visited the home to investigate and would become one of the earliest attractors. He would perform tricks for the children to entertain them and ingratiate himself to the family. That night he caught Janet sneaking around at the top of the stairs looking down them. He thought she was planning some kind of stunt and began to believe that the stories that happened upstairs when the children were alone were also stunts themselves. Maurice Gross returned after the 2 family goldfish were found dead. The voice of Bill Wilkins took credit for their fate, saying, "I done that," and claiming he did it using spirit energy. They said they filled Janet's mouth with water and placed tape over it to test if the voice was truly coming from her or not. They asked Bill to say phrases that were allegedly difficult for ventriloquists to say, such as "bottle of beer," which the voice did without issues. On Christmas Day, a curtain allegedly wrapped around Janet's neck, one of 8 times this was said to have occurred. BBC Scotland visited and interviewed the family. They captured multiple instances of voices channeling through Janet.
And do you get the feeling when you hear the voice that there is a person there?
Yes.
Yeah. And do they tell you much about themselves?
Not really, no.
They just tend to growl and...
Play around and sort of joke and be silly. No.
I wonder, do you think there's anyone there just now?
Yeah, I do.
Who's that?
What?
Who's that, Janet?
Pardon? Stuart Certain.
Stuart Certain, and he's one of the voices.
Yeah.
Why do you think he comes and speaks through you?
To annoy us.
Does he ever say anything nice?
Well, don't know really.
Shall we
Says-
try and speak to him? No. We'll see if he'll speak to us.
Yeah.
Is anybody there?
No.
Who's there?
Doctor Who.
Doctor Who?
Goose Chasers here.
Row, the pub chip is down the street. Merrily, lovely country tree. Now smile.
Janet was admitted to the Madsleys Institute of Neuropsychology to examine whether or not there was a physical or physiological explanation for what she claimed to be experiencing, but she was ultimately deemed healthy. She was away for nearly 6 weeks and experienced nothing unusual while in the hospital, but within an hour of returning home, she claimed to see a figure of a young boy in their kitchen. A Dutch healer and medium visited the home. After performing a ritual, things were calm for the Hodgson family for a fairly long period of time. After previously visiting, the famous Warrens, who will probably go down in history as grifters, again visited. After such a long period of normalcy and inactivity for the family, the Warrens arrived and were able to capture levitation, rocks appearing from nowhere, and what they called spontaneous removal of the wallpaper in the kitchen. Finally, a priest visits the Hodgsons and blesses their home. Janet claimed the incidents again quieted down for the family, but they never stopped completely. The family eventually moved to a new house. Janet went on to lead a normal life and claims to not remember much of what happened when she was a child. In the years since the events of the Enfield Poltergeist occurred, details have emerged casting doubt on the entire story. I can believe that the weird noises and other minor activity the children and the rest of the family observed before the widespread attention could have been real, but Janet and Margaret Hodgson admitted that at least some of the activity was faked by them to trick investigators. Most of the evidence and encounters are easily explainable. The chair in their room probably did slam to the ground, and they probably were in bed by the time the adults got up there, but it would not have been difficult for them to knock the chair over and climb back into bed quickly. A few weeks after Janet witnessed the medium go into a trance and produce drawings, she also went into a semi-conscious state and drew 9 images containing blood, death, and knives. It's unlikely this was a coincidence, but she now claims no memory of this. As for the voices Janet somehow produced, ventriloquist Ray Allen visited the house and concluded that Janet's male voices were simply vocal tricks performed by her, not an entity channeling through her. She takes time to process things and come up with what to say. She cleverly avoids mouth movements, but it's her. You can also see her smiling in between responses. The punchline for the knock-knock joke is even Goose Chase. I'm not sure how much more clear that could be to me that she's playing with the interviewer. The famous levitation image is pretty clear for me as well. The previous image taken in the sequence tied with the image of her in the air paints a picture of her simply leaping off the bed. She was not thrown and she did not levitate. For the most part, the adults involved saw and heard what they wanted to in order to reach their predetermined conclusions. While some witnesses that had nothing to gain are harder to dismiss, like Constable Carolyn Heaps, who claimed to have seen the chair slide across the kitchen, paranormal professionals wanted the stories to be true. Others, like extended family members and neighbors, were probably just scared and let their imagination fill in some blanks. As word spread and attention grew out of control, I think it was too late for Janet and the others to reel things back in. Pressured by countless strangers coming into their home expecting to see the paranormal, they were given the evidence they sought, albeit manufactured.